Hello, I'd like to talk to you for a little bit about these little scraps of pottery and suggest an idea for how we handle our elections. These are the Ostracon, the little pieces of pottery that were often used basically as scrap paper. And the most famous use was in the politics of Athens for less than 100 years, actually. There were some guidelines in the establishment of Athenian democracy, and Athenian democracy was different in many significant ways from the way we view democracy today in America. But the Ostracon was an interesting concept, and just want to talk about it for a second in prelude to some other thoughts on addressing our election issues. It's amazing to me that we still have so many battles about elections and voting and how things are handled when we've been a democracy for nearly 250 years, and we waste a lot of time and energy on issues that it seems to me ought to be settled. And so I'd just like to touch base on that. But first of all, just thinking about the Ostracon, basically pieces of broken pottery that were kind of like ancient scrap paper, most famously used to oust people from Athens. Again, as we already mentioned, this lasted for a period of less than 100 years. There were actually only about 15 or 20 people that were exiled or ostracized from Athens in this method. And those who were ostracized were kicked out of town for 10 years. If they came back on their own, then they were put to death. But as long as they served their 10-year exile, then they could return and all their property and status and everything would be in place just 10 years later from when they were ostracized. And then other reasons, though, have been identified, perhaps just a scrap paper, in this case for an artist. And scholars suggest that the head here of the pharaoh may have been done by the teacher, and then the hands done by a student, as the teacher was trying to teach some principle of art. But for our purposes, Exhibit A, Themistocles Ferrari, and you'll see here there are several of these little Ostracon pieces. These look like buttons, but they're basically, you have actually two Themistocles, one Themistocles from Ferrari, and then the other Themistocles, son of Neoclus. And Themistocles Ferrari was a famous general in the Battle of Marathon, may have been one of the 10 leading generals in that battle, became very famous in Athens over the course of the next several years, leading even up to the final battle against the Persians, establishing the navy and the building of the triremes that were proved crucial in the Greeks defeating the Persians. But then shortly after, he leads the Athenians, the Greeks in general, to victory over the Persians. He is ostracized. The One of the things about ostracism was it wasn't so much a method of punishment for wrongdoing. It often occurred when people simply got tired of hearing your name and worried that you might become too powerful in the context of the fledgling democracy. Exhibit B is Aristides of Athens. Aristides, also known as Aristides the Just, is seen here writing his own name on an ostracon as the gentleman who has requested that Aristides assist him in writing the name of the person he wants ostracized down, tells Aristides that he wants Aristides' name written on the ostracon. And when Aristides asks why and what did Aristides do against him, the man says nothing. He's just tired of hearing about this just person and wants to try to get him banned from the city. Well, Aristides, true to his name and true to his reputation, writes his name on the ostracon, one of the votes that was cast that secured his exile from Athens. So that the exile of individuals from Athens using the ostracon was not always because someone had been so bad or evil and needed to be run out of town, but because the Athenians tended to fear that anybody might gain great power, even somebody known as the just. So, what are some ideas about some issues that we should address sooner rather than later with respect to a national framework for voting? First, in the absence of ostracizing, term limits. I used to be opposed to the concept of term limits, But as we have seen, politicians become more and more entrenched in the halls of Congress and seemingly less and less able to actually negotiate with people on the other side as they become more entrenched and wealthy, et cetera, et cetera. I think it would be good for the nation to have some kind of a term limit system set up for senators and representatives, just like we have for the president. I would also suggest, as an aside, that I think there ought to be a term limit of 25 years for Supreme Court justices to facilitate the transition of seats of power on the Supreme Court and to essentially all but guarantee that virtually every president would have an opportunity to appoint at least one Supreme Court justice. But back to the context of voting, what we the citizens do, a uniform system for voting, so that no matter where in the country one votes, the basic procedures, the equipment, the means are all the same. We don't have different systems, some electronic, some paper, hanging chads in one state and blurry lines in another state. But there's just one system of voting across the country. Voter IDs to ensure that people who are voting where they're supposed to vote, that they vote only one time, and that they are who they say they are. Limited to U.S. citizens. I know there's been some debate that when America was first founded in early democracy, there was no emphasis on citizenship, but it seems reasonable to me that you ought to be able to demonstrate that you are, in fact, a U.S. citizen, and the voter ID would reflect not only that you're a citizen, but where, in fact, you're supposed to vote based on your citizenship, your residency. Age, citizenship, service requirements. This really came to my attention in Vivek Ramaswamy's campaign for president. And when he first mentioned her, when I first heard about it, it seemed like a poor way to earn votes. But as I thought about it, heard him explain it, the policy that he outlines makes a lot of sense. That when people are voting, they'll have some sense, some appreciation for the history and the country, or the history of and the country in which they're voting. And so there ought to be some kind of service, some civil test, etc., that one ought to be passing or partaking in order to have a vote. Election day is a national holiday, that we have one day where people line up to vote, that the voting systems being unified across the country. If there's a problem in one area, we can get the equipment that we need from another area to that area, and the polling places ought to be placed in such a way that the uh, ease for the citizens in getting to a voting place and casting their vote is maximized, the difficulty is minimized. We ought to all but perhaps eliminate mail-in and absentee voting, and just make it an issue that on voting day, America cares about the electoral process enough to stop the day-to-day activities and cast their vote. And then another idea just to highlight that I don't have a corner on all the ideas that are out there. In fact, there may be some that I'll think about later that I'm not thinking about right now or didn't think about when I put this PowerPoint together. But I would like to hear what you have to say, both about what I've said and other ideas that we ought to consider in order to eliminate all of the friction and the fighting that is taking place over how in America we elect our leaders. Thank you very much for your time. Look forward to hearing what you have to say. Bye bye. Thank you very much for your time. I've got a couple other videos listed here if you'd like to take a look at those. And as I'd like to discuss issues related to politics, religion, society, and how in the world we're supposed to understand ourselves and life in the world. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Bye bye.